Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. My name is Patrick. I'm the founder and the CEO of Pod. Today I have the pleasure of speaking to a very accomplished sales leader. You might already know, a seasoned sales consultant, advisor, thought leader, Jon Rydberg. Welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you.
Patrick, thanks so much, man. Looking forward to it.
Hell yeah. Maybe for people that don't know as much about your curriculum, let's tell them a bit about what your
Yeah.
journey has been. You spent over 16 year as a go-to-market execution kind of operator. You started as an AE, climbed the ranks to, across a number of different new business and account management role. You've been a head of sales, you've been a VP of sales. Overall, you've been a 4 times VP of sales. And now you've founded the Align Advisory Group to help kind of startups and growing companies, fine tune their go-to-market engine. Have I missed anything? Is that enough? Are you done yet? When are you retiring?
I think you got it. That's a good recap. Good
Hell
summary.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Well, very glad to have you on. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today because, as Pod, we're a growing startup. We like to think about building repeatable revenue engine. And today, I think a key theme we want to talk about is, the transition from product market fit to repeatable revenue, and think about all the different angles and aspect of it, from coaching to culture to identifying gaps that startups face. So we're going to go through all this today with you, and I'm excited about hearing your take on a lot of these things. But to kick us off, curious to hear about what initially got you into sales. What is your genesis of Jon the seller?
Oh, it goes way, way back. So I kind of love telling this story. My brother and I were pretty entrepreneurial. So there was a big subdivision where we lived growing up in Colorado Springs, and they were building houses constantly. And there were construction workers, and they would have to drive like 5 miles to 7-Eleven. So my brother and I convinced my mom to take us to Costco and buy like cans of soda in bulk. And then we would take it to the construction site and charge them $1. And they're like, hey, this is like 50 cents, right? Like, why would I buy it from you? I'm like, if you want to drive 5 miles and leave the construction site and not get paid, that's great. But I mean, or you can buy it for us from $1. So
Hell yeah.
that was kind of the idea. And then we started doing the same thing with candy. We would get, or my mom would take us to Sam's Club or Costco and get candy in bulk, like blow pops, whatever the case may be. And we would sell them at school too, which was cool. Mainly me, but
that's awesome. Yeah,
so that was kind of the early genesis, origin story, if you will. And then my first job out of college was an account manager for a SaaS project management company back in 2007. And so my internship was working customer support, so product support. So I was, really in the weeds, solving clients' problems. And then the head of account management was like, hey, would you want to come on my team as an account manager and kind of move into the sales realm? And I said, sure. So I hadn't really planned on it, but I connected the dots. It's just something like that entrepreneurial side of me that I really loved, building relationships, talking with people, and kind of the enterprising mindset. And then it mirrored up with this random internship I got working in customer support. And then I knew the product, which was a nice segue into the role. It was pretty early, like 2007, 2008. So pretty early for SaaS. A company called Exposite.
I like that you started on the kind of customer support angle. We were having a conversation a few weeks back with someone saying that I think people that start on the customer service or the customer support side of thing have a kind of a genuine empathy for clients and a genuine need or aspiration to help. And I think that creates very different, I think, not very special profiles of sellers that tend to be very consultative, trying to not necessarily so pushy and transactional, but be there to help whether it leads to a sale or not. So that I like that as a first job or
for sure,
the first starting point.
And I like to say, this may sound cheesy, but helping, not selling.
Yeah.
Because if you're helping to solve a business problem that's going to deliver impact for them, you're going to sell, right? Yeah. But you got to be thinking like you said, empathy, like put yourself in their seat. What is their day-to-day? What are their KPIs? What are they responsible for? What are their personal motivators? What are their professional drivers? Where are they trying to go in the organization? What is the big picture? And if you map back to those things, you're going to have a ton of success. Yeah. And you're not thinking, how can I close this person? But the so what moment, like, why should I care?
Yeah.
So I think that's, if you're answering that and you're mapping to that, I think good things will happen. But I don't feel like, to your point, not transactional at all.
Yeah.
It's more of like problem solving in a lot of ways.
You mentioned the word care. I was exactly going to point out that word because this is something, as you know, I'm building Pod and I'm hiring folks. Caring for what they do, I think is an important trait. It differentiates someone that just treats a job or a sale as a transaction or something they have to do, versus people that are deeply involved or emotionally attached to the outcome. And I think that caring, and the full breadth of what it can mean, caring about your client, caring about doing a good job, caring about delivering value, I think is kind of the foundation to doing exceptional sales work. So that is pretty awesome that you mentioned that.
Just a mindset of excellence. Like, I'm going to do everything I can to the best of my ability, or not do it at all. And if you don't want to do it, that's a motivation thing. So it's not necessarily wrong. Maybe you're just in the wrong role, the wrong seat.
Cool. So this is how you this is how you started. What keeps you going? What are you passionate about recently in the world of sales? What is keeping you either up at night or keeping you motivated?
Yeah, I think for one, in the world of AI, I think sellers, specifically business savvy, high business acumen individuals, there's always going to be a human in the loop. And I think, if anything, I'm a little more concerned about SDRs being replaced by AI, or even SEs being replaced by AI. But there needs to be someone to oversee agents, oversee teams, and there's always going to be a human in the loop. So I think sales is more needed now than ever before. But I think the reps and sales leaders that embrace AI are really going to be above and beyond everyone else, and everyone else is going to honestly kind of get left behind. And so, I just see that as being a huge need and something I'm excited about, because I've always been someone that's, I wouldn't call myself a techie, but just tech curious. I always love to know the new widget, the new tool. How can I kind of get a competitive edge in my day to day? And so it's a really fun time to be in sales. I think we have kind of gone full circle, because you remember the Challenger books. It's like selling is not about relationships, and it's like, I know that's kind of clickbait in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I feel like relationships are more important than ever. And once you've earned the right to be heard, you have a platform in order to sell or provide value or deliver a solution in a lot of ways. So I think AI has only heightened the need for good relationships, because a lot of the day-to-day mundane deliverables can be done with AI, but you still want to have that strong relationship, and you want to have that credibility in the room to deliver value.
I think it creates more space for people who know how to use it properly. It creates more space for people to spend time on the things that are truly, human only. So whether it's, building relationship, building trust, understanding problems, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's, I love that. It is very top of mind in sales in a number of different functions, from people that are running, $100 million companies with a team of 20 because they have 50 AI agents doing work in the background. I think it is changing the way that people think about their org, their teams, their work at a number of different levels. And to your point, John, people who don't, aren't curious or don't thrive to understand how they can leverage it will most likely they'll most likely fall behind in terms of output, in terms of outcome, in terms of quality, etc.
And I even think, like, as I look at different startups in the world, it used to be kind of this, this thing where you needed to be a technical founder. Like, you want to have credibility with VCs. You want to know that they're building the right thing, solving the right problems. And now there's such a lower barrier to entry, because, you don't need to be able to code to do things. There's a lot of low code solutions, and it seems like every day new AI companies are spinning up. Certainly if you have that background, you're going to be ahead of the curve. But, it definitely has lowered the barrier to entry. So it's almost like you want a high business acumen, sales or marketing or CS founder in some ways to have that background, because AI is leveling the playing field. We're not quite there yet, but I see us going in that direction as a whole, which is interesting.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think a lot of first-time founders focus a lot on the technology and on the and I'm generalizing here, but on the technology, on the product, but second and third time founders think a lot about the distribution. So how am I going to get this product into people's hands? How do I build brand awareness and engagement and generate leads, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's quite interesting to see how that also correlates with kind of a commoditization, of building application. It's not applicable to everything, not necessarily services, business, et cetera. But if you think about B2B or SaaS, generally speaking, I think that's definitely true. Cool. What a solid start to the conversation. Let's dive into the meat and potatoes.
Let's do it.
So we've talked about the as the main theme that we want to cover today, transition from kind of product market fit to repeatable revenue. I think a lot of companies that are past the seed stage or Series A and above, they've been founder led for quite some time in their selling motion, and now they have to triple, double their revenue targets over 5 years. Puts a lot of pressure. Sure. You have to hire people and transition from proofs of product market fit to actually like repeatable, scalable revenue engine. So maybe as a starting point, let's start with this foundation. What do you see as being the biggest blockers that startup hit when finding that early traction and doing that transition to a more repeatable selling motion?
No, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, product market fit can get confused with founder-led sales traction. So it's like anyone, and I don't want to, I think of course I'm generalizing here, but anyone will take a call with a founder because they want to hear there's a natural magnetism to them. They've built something. They're excited about it. It's their baby. It's a lot easier to sell when you're the founder in a lot of ways because people are like partnering with you. Maybe they can have more creative liberty to speak into the product and build together in like a partner strategy motion of product development. But the second you try and transition from that founder-led sales to a founding AE, there's usually a pretty substantial drop-off, right, in repeatability, because there's all this tribal knowledge that the founder has. In their brain, they can still tell the story. They know everything because they've gone through these different iterations of the product lifecycle. They've gone through the pain of getting in these rooms and trying to sell and get that early traction. And that hasn't happened, and it's probably not well documented or codified for these new sellers that you bring on. So there's this huge challenge where the founding AE has to come in and sort of organically extract this information or sit them down in multiple Zoom calls or multiple sessions or learn through osmosis, but nothing is well documented. So it makes it very, very difficult. So I think sometimes with product-led or with founder-led sales, you might have real product, real customers, real revenue, but how can you continue to scale that over time? Hiring that first seller and see if they can do it. The second you can have repeatability with rep 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then I think you really have something. But it's easy to like misconstrue that with just early success because the founder is still in the driver's seat in some ways.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, I definitely resonate with that because, as a founder, you come in with an energy and passion of the problem and you've thought about this problem day and night for years, and someone comes in and might understand the problem, might have been in this space before, but they definitely don't necessarily have as much of that passion. So what do you think can be done to de-risk that transition as a founder? Is it just about documentation, or are there things that can be done before bringing on your first founding account executive to make it easier for him or her to hit the ground running without too much hiccups?
That's a great question. I think the main thing, and you nailed it, I mean, you said it, it doesn't need to be a full-blown playbook, but there should be like a new hire ramp acceleration framework of like, hey, here's our TAM, here's our target market, here's the industries or verticals we serve, here's our ICP, here's the different stakeholders we sell to, here's the value messaging that resonates. And if you don't know that stuff as a founder, people partner with people like me that can build out these repeatable playbooks and frameworks to help that transition from founder-led to repeatability. So there's a number of different folks. It's a pretty crowded market that do those types of services, but it is really important because you want to accelerate time to revenue or time to productivity for these reps. And if you don't have something on paper, and I say that on paper like Google Slides, whatever the case may be, PowerPoint, have that well documented so that they can feel like they have enough to be dangerous. And then you also want to, your hiring framework needs to reflect where you are as a company. So bringing in the SAP, Oracle, Cisco, Salesforce rep is not going to be a great solution. Yeah. Obviously, they have endless resources. They have a seat at the table. They have brand recognition. Some of the stuff we were talking about before we hit record. I mean, those things are great. But when you don't have that, how can you be like that MacGyver rep where she can figure it out herself. She can spin up a deck. She can write copy. She can leverage AI resources. She can do all these different things, and she doesn't need all of those resources to be successful.
Support system,
yeah, that support system in place. So you want to hire for that, and you want to have interview questions that reflect this kind of scrappiness and grit. Or if you hire the wrong person, especially in an early stage company, that can be a really risky move because it takes you back 6 months, and then the open ARR for open headcount and trying to rehire, recoach, all the things. It's a lot. And that kind of goes to like, hey, we have this onboarding playbook, this acceleration guide, if you will, and we have our hiring framework, our scorecard with how we evaluate new potential candidates that are coming into our organization to ensure that that's a match and that there's a mutual understanding. There's no, mystification of what's going to happen. This is early stage. You're going to have to hunt and scrap and wear all the hats. They need to know that coming in, and you need to hire for that and how you ask questions in the interview process.
Yeah, I've seen many organizations make that mistake, and even a previous company I was involved with, we wanted to scale, and the first decision was let's hire a bunch of AEs from blue chip companies, and within 6 months there was probably like 95% turnover on that team because we realized it's not that they're not good, but they're good in another context, and you need a very different type of seller to get you from 1 to 5 million, then going to 5 to 50. And I think that's pretty interesting.
Context is king.
Yeah.
And are they going to be happy? Sometimes you have to sell against them in the interview process. Hey, I know you're really excited, but did you know it's going to look like this? Did you know you're not going to have these resources? And it's almost like this anti-selling.
Yeah, you're trying to get that person to say like, actually, this is not for me. And if that's the case, then you
I want to know now.
Close miss. Yeah.
Hire smart, fire fast.
I like the point about like the time to revenue, because I think it is important for that first sales hire, but it's also something as you continue scaling is very, very important. So both I think, I'm curious to hear your take on, as your founder doing that transition, or maybe you have a small team looking to double in the next year and adding new account executive or full cycle sellers. What do you think are the biggest levers to reducing that time to first close, or that time to revenue for a new hire?
This may seem pretty obvious, but having a really good founding team is really important. Not only are they going to attract the right people, but they have the right vision. If the founding team hasn't experienced the operational pain of the folks they're serving, it's difficult because you're kind of living it secondhand in some ways. So I think that's really important for one. And then really good product. You can't overcome a bad product. Like I've been in roles, candidly, startups where it felt a little bit like selling vaporware, and we had some early success, but then the churn happens and you can't stop the churn. You might be able to get your product in the door, but it can be shelfware really quick. So I think that time to value is really important, to have those milestones for impact early on. Like the second you sell it, your touch points, how does that training look like? What is the adoption plan, the success framework in place to ensure they're successful early, and that all the right stakeholders are engaged, or else it becomes shelfware, and then you're doomed. So you kind of have this like window, hypercritical window as a startup like within the first 90 days, you need to be delivering some type of value realization framework, or else it's not going to stick. So I think that's really important too. But you can't overcome bad product if you don't have product market fit. If there's not a need in market and people are rejecting it, it doesn't matter how great you are as a seller or how scrappy you are. If you're that MacGyver person, nothing will help you. So I think, and obviously like 90% of startups fail, we know.
Yeah.
So all those things need to be kept in mind as you're looking to scale. But I think having the right people in the bus, and to your point, context is king. The right people for where you are as a company and what you sell in that vertical is really important.
Beautiful. Maybe let's project ourselves into an apocalyptic scenario where a founder doesn't do anything when kind of transitioning from kind of product market fit to try to build it repeatable. What do you think is the cost of doing nothing, or like what is the not necessarily the cost, but the consequence of not doing nothing? If you're a founder, you don't necessarily do much. You just hire a first AE, 6 months later, 2 additional AEs. Mm-hmm. What do you picture to be their situation if nothing is done to mitigate that transition?
So I think the main thing here is, if you've heard the term delegate to elevate, it's really important. It's like your baby and you want it to go well, but it's kind of like that frontline sales manager that's, like kind of like the helicopter parent, right? Yeah. On the call that's trying to rescue them and save them all the time. That's going to be a recipe for disaster, because you should be like working with VCs, growing the brand, speaking, going on panels, marketing yourself and your company instead of, babysitting reps on calls, especially when you've hired your first sales manager. So I think part of the problem is they think they need to be involved for it to be successful, but it's actually antithetical. It's like, hey, the irony is you need to not be involved so it can be successful. With that said, I think at least the first 20 to 30 customers, depending upon if it's like high velocity SMB or your upmarket or whatever, usually speaking at early stage, your first customers might be smaller in general, but it just sort of depends on what you're selling. I think the founder should be involved so they can get some critical mass and some traction. So you have referenceable customers that you can reference sell, and you have some social proof. But then from there on, you should be planning out how you can transition, like a transition plan for giving it to the first rep. And then if you don't have a sales leader involved and you have a couple of reps, totally fine. But you need to kind of be more of a manager and less of like owning sales. And the other thing is it's hypercritical. And I've seen this time and time again. It's a story as old as time, or a tale as old as time, is the founder having their own deals. It creates an unhealthy culture. It creates animosity, distrust, a lot of resentment that, hey, am I competing against my founder? Why does he get all the big deals, the Fortune 100 clients, and I have these mid-markets and I'm the enterprise rep that they hired? And then when will they like allow me to take over? Or am I like, literally, are they taking money out of my pocket? So I think that's like okay. So there is some of that. And it'd be one thing if it was like strategic accounts that were grandfathered in. But when a big logo comes in the door, that's like, oh, Patrick, I can take it from here. And you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Like
interesting. It comes from a place probably where the founder's like, hey, I just want to make sure that this deal goes well, but it kind of shows that you're not trusting your team to do a good job. And that's
100%. And so I would always create comp plans that talk about like the separation of church and state, that like you're not going to be competing against the founder. You have your own accounts. There's not going to be splits with the leadership team. Those types of like very black and white constructs need to be implemented in comp plans to create healthy swim lanes so that people can feel psychologically safe to grow in the company, sell, and that they're not competing with the founding team.
Yeah, those are the type of small things and processes put in place that can have a huge impact on morale, motivation, and ultimately, life is all about incentives, but particularly in sales. And if incentives are don't necessarily represent the type of behavior you want your sales rep to portray in going after an account or et cetera, I think it can bite you in the butt for sure. we've touched on part of this, or we've started to touch on it, but let's talk about the go-to-market handoff process, people, technology. What are some of the foundational thing that, as a founder and as an early go-to-market team, you want to be putting in place in order to have kind of a solid go-to-market engine moving forward and start creating that repeatable selling motion? What are the big pillars, and then we can dive into some of them specifically.
I think for one, having a common language, like a RACI framework, who's responsible for what, why, having clear, like, I go back to swim lanes. I think that's really important. So people understand, like, if you own multiple things, if you own too many things, you own nothing because you can't focus. And a lot of times everyone's moving really, really fast in a startup and rowing really hard, but not necessarily in the same direction. So I think the most critical thing are having aligned OKRs, a couple per department, where people own the KRs, right? They own the success of those and they're responsible for reporting those. And then having things like RACI frameworks to understand who owns what and why and the thought process behind that. And then a common language too. It's just like, hey, for example, marketing, sales, CS can all talk MedPick, right? They can evaluate deals. They can evaluate. Let's align. Everyone's on the same page with who is our ICP, who are we serving, and that's really important too, because it's like, hey, the problem statement and our solution offering. What are we focused on solving as a core business, and then how are all the different departments reflecting that? And so those top level North Star goals, those OKRs, you should be able to see the traction across all the different business units, whether it's product or marketing or sales or CS, engineering. Everyone's rowing in the same direction, because if you don't, people will in theory work really, really hard, because the type of people that are attracted to a startup are typically those types of people. Yeah. But they could be rowing in slightly different directions, and you can burn a lot of cash that way.
I was gonna ask, how do you balance that, the mix between hustle and structure overall? That's the biggest thing. People are trying to do things, and you want to have that energy of like, hey, let's not overthink it and do things. But how do you balance both of these things? Where do you draw a line? How do you define at which point do you start structuring a process and building common language, to your point, versus just figuring it out as you go?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's like experimental and A/B testing, because you're going to figure out what works and what doesn't, but the goal shouldn't change. It's like, hey, we want to land 200 customers by this date. We want to get to $1 million ARR, or 2 million, or 3 million, whatever it is, by this date. Here's what we're focused on. Here's our churn goal or our net revenue retention goal. And everyone's working to the same thing. And so is every decision you make, does this reflect, is it in alignment with that OKR? If it's not, and it's not closest to the dollar activity, or if it's not going to help you hit that release date sooner or align with that product feature shipment, it's like, then let's not do that, because it's easy to get like distracted in a lot of ways. But that's why the OKRs are so important, because you're constantly reflecting. It's almost like a litmus test or a baseline for you to reflect on, to know that you're heading in the right direction. Temperature gauge.
So really, really, I like this, because it's not so much about defining everything in at the utmost level of details, but rather aligning on the North Star direction, the O, and the objectives and the underlying key results. And and that doesn't take a lot of time. That doesn't take out the focus from the hustle, but it allows, to your point, everyone to be pointing in the right direction and rowing in the same direction, as opposed to all have their own somewhat interpretation of the objectives and perhaps going into
totally. And I think too, it's like the vehicle that gets you there. Like, you probably want to have a repeatable sales framework. You probably want to have a qualification process. You want to have a defined ICP. You want to know your value statements, or your elevator pitch, or for the right individual you're selling to. All the different things you're going to need, but it's all in service of that KR that person owns. And so I think that's the difference. It's, yes, you're going to need to build out and explain to your team how you're going to hit this and what you're going to roll out, but at least it's in service of these, objectives that everyone has agreed to, that's voted on across the company.
What do you see as being the big no-nos, the don'ts of that kind of type of transition, things that will actually do more harm than good?
Trying to boil the ocean, selling to everyone. It's easy especially when you're trying to hit a revenue number and the wrong profiles. A prospect outside of your ICP is really, really interested. That can derail product roadmap. It can be a high churn risk, and it could be a black eye, like an unreferenceable customer in market, especially early on. But I think you start seeing, especially reps, see the dollar sign and they get excited and they want to close someone, and they may be able to close it. But that's where you have to have the wherewithal to say, hey, I know you want to close this, but this is in alignment with someone who's not going to be a good fit. It's going to be a high churn risk, and it's going to negatively impact the business. So we're not going to go after them. But I've seen it too much where you're trying to be all things to all people, and you sell to everyone, and then you have no identity. You have, two people in every single vertical, all these different client types. And it gets really confusing how to have repeatability if you're selling to everyone.
I was actually having a conversation earlier this week with someone talking about, the prominence and maybe in the past 5-10 years of horizontal companies, like selling into a number of different industries or verticals. And the fact that even though you still have success stories these days, it's much harder to do because if you don't focus on a few verticals or segment or industry, then it is true from a sales perspective that you end up diluting your efforts and doing kind of a bit of things here and there, but the best approach is rather be very, very specific in terms of who you want to sell to or which segment or which market, so you can put all your resources around that. And I think many companies, as they continue growing, like take a more and more of a verticalization approach. Even if they are horizontal, they're going to split their team, their go-to-market team, their sales and marketing around vertical, insurance or marketing or whatnot. And I think that, to your point about objectives and key results, helps to align everyone in one direction as opposed to opportunistically sell one thing, one there, but spread yourself thin. So I think that's a super good point.
And I think Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore is a great book for that, because he talks about kind of boiling the ocean, being spread too thin. And all that does is just create confusion and repeatability. Yeah. And it just hinders growth in a lot of ways. So it's a lot easier to say, hey, we have 20 real estate companies. We have a really good story here. Let's have some success here and capture more market share before we go to the next one. Why just jump into all these different types? Of course, it all depends. Like you said, context is king, right? It's it just depends on the context, what you're selling, who you're serving, etc. But it's a good thing to keep in mind.
I think this is what's tough about being focused and targeted, and I think in startup is the impact of not being targeted is it's kind of a sleeper impact. It's not clear right off the bat. But it chips away at your resources, your time, and you might not realize it, but 3 months down the line, you actually haven't made a lot of progress and you've burnt a lot of cash, and your team doesn't necessarily have direction. So I think that's very interesting because it can kill a lot of companies, or it can kill the productivity of a lot of go-to-market teams as a whole. But in the day-to-day, you might not, you can justify why you want to jump on this one deal that is completely left field in an industry that you're never going to sell into again.
And the sales rep will sell you on it because they want to get paid, right? Yeah. So that's the other thing. That's why CS should get involved too and have one last, litmus test or fact check. Hey, is this who we want to bring on? Does it meet all these requirements of a good client? It's hey, break down. I know if you're early stage, maybe you don't have all the clients in the world or customers to compare to, but do a retro on your customer base and be hey, these are all the things that we deem to make a really good fit. Do they meet these qualifications for the ideal customer profile? And if they don't, and if it's scored low, let's not bring them on, because it's delaying pain. At the end of the day, they're going to eat up all of your CS and support resources and drain your company, and likely make a lot of picky decisions that will derail product roadmap. Hey, we want this, and what about that? And our industry wants that. And you never intended to go down this path. So what are you going to do with this customer? It's a tough spot.
Yeah. So for companies that have started to build this repeatable kind of revenue process, coaching is, I think, a key part of what helps an organization, a sales organization more specifically, to perform, right? Both coaching the coach, so coaching the managers, to obviously coaching the reps. And as many organizations think about scaling in a very profitable way, you don't necessarily just want to throw resources at a problem and hire, but rather trying to get more out of your team. So get them to attain more of their quota, or close more deals per rep. So culture, coaching being a very important part, I think, of what can help to build this repeatable engine. What does coaching in the context of sales and B2B sales mean to you, Jon?
Yeah, coaching is everything in so many ways. I kind of view it as just removing roadblocks from sellers to close more deals. So anything that could be preventing them from having success out in the field, remove that blocker. I think also too is just empowering, equipping, being another set of eyes. Even if you're doing call coaching, you're using tools like Pod to kind of like level up folks, let them know insights. Hey, did you know this? You might want to double click into that. Here we missed this area of MedPick. This is missing this key component there. So I think a lot of it is just understanding, hey, what does excellence look like for our team, industry? What's our baseline? How can we grow individually? And also segmenting it by, product excellence, territory excellence, sales excellence, business IQ, having all these different factors that are important. And then I just like to have scorecards on everything. But it's like, hey, how am I managing my territory? How am I growing personally and professionally? And then reflecting on that in the one-on-ones. And so there's a couple different call types I typically have. I call it a hit list call. It's a pipeline review call. It just sounds more intense. It's kind of like a deal rep where you invite everyone on the call. So you as a founder, Patrick, would be invited, the head of sales, all of your reps, and you're just going deal by deal, talking about the blockers, challenges, what the hangups are. You can go through whether it's BANT or MedPick or Spiced or whatever it is. You're going through that. You're kind of fact checking, and other people can kind of chime in, ask questions, and you end up uncovering things you weren't seeing and kind of looking at blind spots. So that's one. And then a pipeline accountability call is typically 15 minutes, no more. So you look at performance results against quota. If you're above quota or at quota, you're good. If you're not there, let's look at pipeline. You should have adequate pipeline coverage to hit your goal. If you don't have the pipeline, that's a problem. Let's look at activity. So it'd be one thing if you're like, hey, I'm not quite at quota, but we're halfway through the quarter, but you're trending in the right direction and you have enough pipeline coverage. But if you don't, that shows activity. And then we need to make sure we have enough activity to build that pipeline coverage to hit our goal. Yeah. So it can be a really short call. It could be 2 minutes, or even pushed if a rep's already there. But it's a good way to have a cadence to touch base. And then, of course, one-on-ones. And one-on-ones are all about the rep. It's what are they trying to achieve? What are their personal financial targets or goals? I find people are a lot more apt to be engaged if they're like, hey, I want to buy my first home. I want to buy this car. I'm saving up for my wedding. I want to go on this surf trip, or whatever the case may be. I think it's a lot more fun to figure out, let's reverse engineer our quarter, our year, to see how we can get you there. Here's what you would need to do. So I like doing stuff like that. I think it's helpful for reps to make it real.
There's a couple of things I really like about what you just said, Jon. I think the first one is splitting the different types of coachings, or perhaps the different levels of coaching in different meetings. I think at times people try to shove it all into the one-on-one, and you're going to review deals, and in the last 5 minutes you'll say, okay, so how do you feel, and are you on track with your pipeline? And I think it muddies the water. So I think different parts of the brain get activated whether you're talking about life goals versus like tactics in a deal. It leaves space 100% for folks to be able to prepare, right? I really like that. I think it's a very simple way to go about it, but I think it leads to better segmentation in the approach. I love that. I love the metrics approach. I think this is I think people like metrics, but don't necessarily know how to leverage them. And I think using the right metrics for the right meeting has a good impact. And ultimately, the most important thing for me is, you mentioned scorecards, but the value of scorecards to me is having some sort of like objective way to measure, performance. But most importantly, what I've seen the best scorecard have is like actionable ways to improve. And I think that's what all sales reps are looking at the end of the day, is either actionable ways to improve the standing of a deal, the standing of my pipeline, my core soft skills, or etc. So I think that's those three things, like segmenting the meeting, bringing metrics, and then, having actionable paths of improvement, I think makes for, it's first time thinking about coaching in that way, but makes for a very strong framework of coaching for both first line managers, but also, VPs and CROs in an organization. I love that.
Completely agree. I think scorecards are just a means to an end, right? The end is like upskilling, getting better, having more insights, being able to close more business, grow more pipeline, and hit your revenue targets and personal goals. I can't stress enough the personal goal piece, because no one is ever going to be as invested as you and I are as founders, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is our thing, right? They're leasing their career to us. So how can we get them incentivized? You mentioned incentives are everything, right? It's like, how can we incentivize them to be in alignment with us? And I think especially there's an interesting aspect of being a frontline sales manager where they have this special relationship. You're going through hell and high water together. You're closing deals, you're losing deals. It's really hard at a startup. Startups are gnarly. It's one of my favorite things to say. Startups are just super gnarly. You never know what's going to happen. It's really, really hard. It's not for everyone. It's almost like dog years. Like 1 year at a startup is like 5 years anywhere else. And so, I think just understanding that this is very challenging, that it's not the same as selling something that you sold at a company with like, a massive logo where everyone knows you and you have recognition and all the stuff. And so knowing that, empathizing with them, but also pushing them. It shouldn't also be like a get out of jail free card. You should still have really good process, really good activity, be doing the right things to get the outcomes you want. But when you don't get the outcomes, it's like outside of like the coaching cues and tips and tricks we can help implement, or even, like Pod to help you know where you're missing. Some of it too is just going to be, it's a startup and they just said no and it's really hard. And, I don't want to like make this overly scientific, but sometimes it's a product market fit problem.
Yeah.
So,
I think the bottom line for me with everything you just mentioned is that, coaching is not just a big company process item on a checklist. Like from the very first day, you should be finding ways to involve or embed coaching into your work on the go-to-market side. It could be the founder with the AE, and it could go both ways. I really like to use coaching session for both ways. How can I be a better help? How can I be a better manager or a better founder for you? But also, how can we help you to up level? And it doesn't have to be maybe as complex and extensive as when you have a 25 people team, but I think just doing it in some way, shape, or form, I think creates the right space for conversations, for talking about objective key results and tactical ways to improve.
Yeah, I think you said it well there. I mean, like, some is better than none. It doesn't have to be this like robust checklist for every coaching call. It's just like, hey, Patrick, how do you feel that call went? What would you have done differently? How do you think our value message was received today? And just asking some questions to get their feedback, and just saying, hey, here's some observations I had. First off, incredible job with this, this, and this. I did notice the affect of the customer when we went through this. Maybe we spent too much time on there. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Just like some observations, and like, hey, here's what I think we could do better next time. And you're putting yourself in the boat. It's not like, hey man, Patrick, here's where you missed. Big miss here. Can't believe you did that. Or like the sandwich compliment stuff, like, good job, terrible job, good job. It's just like, hey, here's some observations I had in the call. I think we could probably clean this up. I noticed this. What are your thoughts? And getting buy-in, and say, hey, here's some next steps. I'll do this, you do that. We'll show up to the next call. Is there anything I can do to be a better help to you and support in that call? I feel like I maybe under-resourced you and prep for that.
Yeah.
And kind of taking ownership as a manager.
I love this, because I think this is both a lesson for the person being coach and the coach.
For sure.
Herself, right? I think it's coaching is, no one trains you to be a manager, but no one trains you to coach. So I love this. So thank you so much, Jon. This was great.
Yeah.
Let's
Awesome.
transition towards the final section of the conversation. Very lightweight, very, not meant to be overly structured or thoughtful, but maybe. So I have a few rapid fire questions I'd love to ask you. But before that, I'd be curious to hear your take on what is one piece of advice you'd wish someone had given you when you first started in sales, looking back, that you would have find very helpful.
I would say pre-call planning. Oddly enough, I didn't really learn this until I think my second sales job. I didn't have it for the first one. I know that sounds insane, but literally just thinking, what's my desired outcome from the call? What are the key information I need? How can I have a point of view going into the call of like news you can use or a way in which to show me, me kind of a thing. You kind of just went into the call. And granted, I had existing accounts for my first, and then the rest were hunting roles. But I think just having a game plan for each call, and in general, it's like, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Like, obviously, there's a purpose for the meeting and an agenda, but that was it. It wasn't like, hey, here are the 3 questions I'm going to ask. Here's the anticipated objections that they're going to have. And when I first did like a Sandler training and I learned about all these things, it was just like, what in the world? Did I really just do like a job for a year and not know any of this? I feel like I've been done a disservice.
So yeah, this is great. Yeah. This is great. About preparation and structure out of meeting. Yeah. I mean, it's the way I think about B2B sales, especially for more mid-market or enterprise deals, is like you might spend on a given deal maybe 10% of your time on the call or interacting with the prospects, right? This is kind of like prime time. It's the Super Bowl. You have to be on your A game.
100%.
But like the 90% around it is as important to make sure you're doing, you're preparing, what to say, what's the latest, the right approach, about your product, etc. Both of them kind of go hand in hand, and, not putting as much attention in, your preparation than your quote unquote performance I think is a recipe for underperformance overall. So
and you may or may not be surprised, but it's shocking how many reps don't pre-call plan still in 2025. They kind of like wing it. They're like, oh, this client's basically like, or this prospect's basically like the prospect I met with 3 weeks ago. I like looked at their LinkedIn for 5 seconds. I'm good. I got this. And it feels very generalized. And if the most important thing is show me you know me, you're literally not showing them you know them.
Yeah.
Because you haven't done the research. You don't have a value statement to share relative to their specific role. You're just kind of rolling into it. So it's like you're going to get a generic result, right?
You could have spent 5 more minutes to look at the news and realize that they closed off a big plant, and that would have changed the tone of the conversation. But you go in and you're like, how's the growth been? Like, you'll lose a lot of credibility there.
Oh, 100%.
I love that. Pre-call preparation I think is so critical. Okay, rapid fire question.
Let's go.
Don't overthink the answers. First thing that comes to mind. Okay. Number 1, what's your favorite sales methodology framework?
It would be a hybrid. I would say something between proactive selling, Sandler, and challenger sale. If you mashed all of those together,
what would
that
you
would
call
be
it?
And then definitely MedPick for sales qualification.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah. How about you?
I'm a big fan of MedPick.
Yeah.
But mostly for more complex and enterprise selling motion. I think it's pretty exhaustive, but I think a lot of people are going to stick to it in an overly rigid way and not necessarily understand how it fits into their product or their selling motion. So I only like MedPick when it's given that extra level of thoughtfulness.
Yeah, it's like enterprise, complex, multi-stakeholder.
Exactly.
So I hear this all the time. There's nothing wrong with it, but a lot of people conflate, this is what I've noticed, like qualification frameworks with sales processes or sales process types or sales methodologies. So I view like a sales methodology is like more generic, like Sandler, spin selling, challenger, proactive selling, which then you can layer on whatever qualification framework you want to qualify deals. But I hear that all the time. So
that's fair. That's a good point. One is more of an approach to selling, approach to selling. The other one is more of a okay.
More of a framework for qualify, like a diagnostic checklist to make sure you're on track.
That's an important nuance. Yeah, that's a good point. Second question: favorite productivity tool that you use on a day-to-day basis?
I would say in life in general. I mean, ChatGPT is insane.
That's fair.
It's so helpful.
That's fair. Yeah,
I mean, it's become my doctor now. I'm just like, hey, what do you think about this?
All of a sudden, you have cancer over everything.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh, this is terrible. I'm never asking you this again. Divulging all this personal information is PII to ChatGPT. I would say that's good. I can't imagine like scaling my life without like Reclaim AI or like Calendly, where it's like crawling all my calendars. They're all connected. So I have like my personal, my business, and my different clients. Cause like, just like we have a shared Slack channel, right? It's like, hey, I have a shared Slack channel with all these companies. I have a shared calendars. It just makes things so easy for scheduling. Yeah. So I think those calendar tools are really, really effective. I know they're very simple, like point solutions, but I can't imagine doing business or living life without those now.
Because either you need to have an executive assistant to help you do that, or you pay $10 a month and you basically have
100%.
Cool. Two last questions. The first one is, what is one sales popular belief that you actually hate or disagree with?
ABC, always be closing. How about like always be qualifying or always be curious or anything else? So maybe like always be curious should be the ABC. Yeah. So maybe it's not ABC is a bad thing. Yeah. But I mean, if you're closing the wrong person, we talked about that earlier. Yeah. How horrific is that for the organization that you have like basically a non-referenceable customer, someone that's going to eat up all these resources, and now you have a black eye in market. Yeah. But I think the old school way of selling, my grandpa was a salesman, is like, you're just going to sell everyone. You're just going to hard close. You're going to talk about features, products, benefits, and then just close them. And that's that. And maybe you'll uncover pain. Maybe you'll do good discovery, but you're going to close them. All roads lead to closing the person versus saying, hey, based on our conversation today, it doesn't seem like there's a mutual fit here, Patrick, because of X, Y, Z. So we're going to go ahead and like amicably just disengage from this conversation. I really appreciate meeting you. You're a great dude, but there's not a fit here based on what we do and your current environment and situation. So that's not talked about enough, but everyone's trying to close someone instead of making sure there's a mutual healthy fit to proceed in the partnership. So I think that's a really negative view, and you watch these movies like Boiler Room or like The Wolf of Wall Street or all these things where closing people like hardcore transactional.
The toxic sales culture.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's I think on one of our previous podcast conversation, someone said the no is only the second best answer. So like getting to a yes is great, but like getting to a no is the second best answer, because the other option is like a maybe, and then maybe it turns into a yes, but it ends up biting you in the butt. So
totally.
Okay, great. Last question. Favorite way to not just favorite and most creative way to re-engage with a prospect that you've ever used or heard of? We've heard some wild stuff, John. So
I'm sure you've heard some wild stuff. This is not going to be wild, but
that's okay as long as it works.
I would definitely say gifting.
For sure.
And the more you know about someone, the better. So it's like, hey, look on LinkedIn. Maybe you've had conversations. You see like a golf club in the background or something like that, or they're going on a big golf trip. It's like, hey, let's get this guy some Pro V1s. And he's like, oh man, I love that Yeti. I would love to have something like that. And it's like, cool. Now I know his name. So it's like you get a Yeti with, their initials on there, or a Stanley, whatever the case may be. But just think about things that they've mentioned. And man, I've heard some that are like pretty creative. I had a rep one time where one of his prospects had a really bad cold and had to miss the meeting, and he sent her like
cough drops,
tea,
okay,
cough
that's
drops
awesome.
with
That's
like honey,
awesome.
like a whole care package. And this wasn't
Yeah.
like Sendoso. This was like
Yeah.
him putting it together, like
Out of
handpicking all these different items.
Walgreens,
Yeah,
and then
going to Walgreens and like emergency, like the vitamin C packets that you put in water, like put it all together and sent it to her. And I was like, that is unbelievable.
That's thoughtful. And for you, I would imagine that a pair of tickets to see the Buckeyes is probably gonna.
100%. You had me at Buckeyes.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jon, thank you so much for taking the time. I love the thoughtfulness. I love kind of the very tactical nature, a lot of things that you mentioned. As a last thing, I know that you put a lot of content out there. You help a lot of organization through Align and through your partnership with the Soar Performance Group. Yeah. Where can people find you? Where can people follow you to get a glimpse into your wisdom and experience?
LinkedIn, baby.
Oh yeah.
Jon Rydberg, LinkedIn. Hit me up. Would love to connect. Would love to have a conversation. And then alignrev.com.
Oh yeah. So, beautiful. Well, thank you so much again for the folks out there. I'm Patrick. I'm the founder and the CEO of Pod. Stay tuned for another great episode of the podcast.